Well, hello everybody. My name is Adam Larter and I'm a Developer Specialist Solutions Architect at AWS. Thanks for joining me today for this webinar. I'm really excited to introduce AWS Cloud9 to you. AWS Cloud9 is a cloud-based integrated development environment that reimagines what it means to develop in the modern world where applications are born and live in the cloud. It's a service that will help you write and debug code directly in your AWS environment from any machine with just a web browser. In this session today, I'm going to set the scene and start off by talking about the three pillars of software development and share how we think about software development here at AWS. We'll talk about why we set out to build a new IDE and take a closer look at some of the benefits of AWS Cloud9. We'll then dive deeper into AWS Cloud9 with a demo and explore some of the features in some real coding and use case examples. Now, after that demo, we'll cover off the regional availability and take some of your questions if time permits. The recorded presentation and slides that you're about to watch will be shared in the next week or so. So if you'd like to share the presentation with your colleagues or revisit the content, you can go ahead and do that. And if you have any questions during this session, please use the questions panel to ask them and we'll try to address them in the next hour. Okay, so let's dive straight in. Today, I think you'll agree software development moves really fast as companies try to get their products to market quickly to meet customer demands. Now, developers need three main things to build their software applications. At AWS, we like to think of them as the three pillars of software development. First, you need core infrastructure where developers can run applications. Infrastructure like compute, storage, databases, and so on. AWS provides an extensive range of services and tools that support running your services online. For example, AWS EC2, AWS Fargate, Amazon ECS, AWS Lambda, and a whole range of compute options in those categories enable you to run your applications and choose the right compute infrastructure for your workload in the cloud. AWS also has a comprehensive range of storage options, Amazon Aurora, Amazon RDS, Amazon Redshift, and Amazon DynamoDB, for example, for the data tier, and services like Amazon S3, Amazon Glacier, Amazon EFS, and Amazon EBS in the storage tier. There are a lot of options to cater for your particular use case, throughput and availability requirements. Second, you need operational efficiency to ensure that you're able to get your software to market as quickly as possible, and then learn from it and iterate. AWS provides services to help you release your software quickly and adopt continuous integration and delivery practices. With AWS Code Commit, you can maintain your source code working in a team committing to the same repository, and once you've got your code checked in, you'll likely want to build release artifacts and deploy them with AWS Code Build. And then you need to push those release artifacts out into QA, staging, and other environments like production with AWS Code Deploy. AWS provides a range of tools to get your code from the IDE and into production, and all of this can be orchestrated with AWS Code Pipeline to make it easy for you to spin up an entire CI/CD pipeline, repository, build, etc. You can also either do that manually, or you can use AWS CodeStar to get up and running and writing software in just a couple of minutes. So you have a lot of options and a whole range of tools to get your code from the IDE and into production. The final element in the three pillars is all about creating and writing the code that makes up your application. And this is where AWS Cloud9 comes in. AWS Cloud9 is a cloud-based integrated development environment, IDE, that allows you to write, run, and debug your code with just a browser. It combines a rich set of features and tools, code editing in the IDE, such as hinting and complete code completion, step 3 debugging, and at all times you have access to the underlying Linux server for running commands and storing your code. So why do we decide to go ahead and build a new IDE? As you can probably all relate to, we're all building software for the cloud, but we're using local development machines, and so there's a bit of a disconnect here. Firstly, developers today rely on local machines and local hardware configurations. So your laptop may not be the same spec to what's running in production. It's also really hard to multitask on multiple projects. Just imagine one or more customer projects that you're working on, or your own dev projects, or some research that you've got going on. And you want to quickly switch between these environments to different projects. So you might not have the same software installed, the same dependencies and the same tools. And so you can waste a lot of time setting all this up. And next, I guess it's difficult to work in multiple locations. Even with a laptop, sure, you can take your laptop wherever you go, it's portable, but it's also fragile. And if there's a problem with your laptop, you need to set everything up again from scratch, install all the tools and dependencies, and that can take time. So that leads me to the next point, which is that it's cumbersome to set up a new environment. Often when you get started, you have to install the IDE and then install the plugins, configure the IDE, configure your settings, and then you need to configure the stack for the project you're working on. You might be using Docker or you might be using a local web server, but you still need to configure the stack for every project that you've got going on. And then you might want to match your development environment as closely with your production environment, as closely as you can, because you don't want any environment disparity there. And so there's more work to do. And once you've got all of that in place, then you can start writing code and being productive. But before you get to writing the code, you've already spent a long time setting everything up. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this pain. It takes a lot of time, and you've no doubt gone through it many times. Now, imagine you've got several projects that you're working on. You need to repeat all of those steps again and again before you can write the code. And if you're a team leader or manager, imagine you've got multiple developers in your team, and they're all repeating these processes on their machines, configuring their environments, keeping things up to date, and maintaining those environments again before they can be productive. The third thing we need to address here is collaboration. Now, in the past, it's been a bit difficult to collaborate, especially with remote developers. Imagine you want to have a code review. You need to have everyone standing behind your screen. Well, screen sharing tools are cumbersome to use, and you need to, again, install the right agents and configure everything on everyone's machines. But collaboration is a really important aspect of developing software. Pair programming, for example, or just getting another developer's opinion on a problem that you're working on. You need to be able to collaborate easy with your peers. And whether they're in the same office or in another country, that needs to be very easy to do. The fourth aspect is that IDEs today have not caught up with or kept up with the needs of serverless application development. AWS Lambda is really changing how we think about building systems and applications in the cloud. And with this change, of course, your tooling needs to adapt. Tooling today doesn't really cater for the needs of serverless applications, and we wanted to address that. So with all of this in mind, this is why we wanted to introduce you today to AWS Cloud9 and go through some of the features. So AWS Cloud9 is an IDE that runs in the browser. So you can launch the IDE from any machine, any laptop, any desktop, as long as you have a web browser and internet connectivity. You can very easily, quickly start new projects. So as I mentioned earlier, you may want to be installing you won't need to be installing the IDE and the plugins and configuring the tooling and the stack before you can start writing code. You can get up and running really, really quickly. With AWS Cloud9, this is all done in a single step. You just create an environment, and within a minute or so, as you're going to see in the live demo, you're fully configured and ready to go to start writing your code. AWS Cloud9 makes collaborating on code really easy as well. You can share your development environment with your team in just a few clicks and pair program together. While collaborating, your team members can see each other type in real time and instantly chat with one another from their IDE. You can collaborate on a piece of code. You can run a code review. If you're teaching someone, you can easily do that with Cloud9. It's very quick and easy to do. AWS Cloud9 makes it really easy to write, run, and debug serverless applications. And this is a key point. Serverless application development is a real paradigm shift in the way that applications are built. With serverless, of course, you don't have to worry about the underlying servers. And you can really rethink the way that you design your decoupled applications. But the IDEs that are out there today have not really kept up. They don't really provide the tools to make it easy to develop, test, and deploy serverless applications. AWS Cloud9 pre-configures the development environment with all the SDKs, libraries, tools, and plugins that you need for serverless development. AWS Cloud9 also provides an environment for testing and debugging your AWS Lambda functions. This allows you to iterate on your code directly and saves you a lot of time and helps you to improve the quality of your code. So what I want to show you today is how easy and simple it is to create a new AWS serverless application with one or more AWS Lambda functions and take advantage of AWS Cloud9's blended workflow that combines local debug and testing and remote execution. And all this goes a long way to making developing serverless applications on AWS a really great developer experience. I'm going to run through this deep integration with AWS Lambda in more detail during the live demo shortly. Now, as developers, we always need direct access to the machine that we're running the IDE on. AWS Cloud9 allows you to directly access the underlying machine via the terminal. And in that terminal, you also get direct access to your AWS environment via the AWS CLI. And the AWS credentials running on that machine are already configured for you following best practice, again, removing some of that startup friction to get you working securely straight away. Okay, so that's it for the high-level overview. Let's jump into the demo. So this is the landing page of AWS Cloud9, and the first thing that we will need to do is to create an environment. So you can consider an environment is like a dedicated development machine that runs in the cloud and you access via your browser. And because you can create an environment for every developer, you don't need to share resources, but AWS Cloud9 allows you to collaborate, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll take a little bit of a look at that a little bit later. So because I don't have any environment set up, there's nothing to show here, but what I can do a little bit later when I create some environments, I can have a look at environments that have been shared with me in that collaboration mode. And also if I'm a manager, I may want to look at all of the environments that have been created in my AWS account so I can keep track of all those developer environments. So let's get started by creating an environment. I just click on create, give it a name. So I'm just going to call this webinar dev. And I can optionally add a description. I won't bother with that at the moment. Now, there are two types of machine configuration settings that we can use. EC2, which is fully managed by AWS Cloud9, or SSH. So I'm just going to have a look at that one first. With SSH, you create the machine or you run the machine yourself anywhere in the world, as long as it has an internet routable address and it's accessible on port 22 anywhere on the internet, then AWS Cloud9 IDE can access it. So in that case, you provide the username that you want to log on as, the host name that can be resolved as, and what you need to do for authentication is you need to copy this public key, which is dynamically generated, and put it in the known hosts file on the machine so that the SSH session can be set up. You also have some configuration options here. You can set the environment path, you can set the path to the Node.js binary, which Cloud9 requires in order to do its work. But also really importantly, from a security perspective, you can use a bastion host or a jump host. And what you can set up there is that bastion host can forward the traffic into an instance that's behind that bastion host. And this allows you to reduce the attack surface that you're exposing to the outside world. Now, I'm not going to use that option today. I'm going to use the fully managed EC2 option. In this case, if I choose that option, I have a short list here of the instance types that I can choose to run my underlying compute on, but I also have many other instance types that I can choose. The way that I would make a decision here is depends on the sort of work that I want to do. If I'm doing a lot of machine learning or if I'm doing a lot of compiling, I might need to have multiple CPUs on the instance. If I'm doing a lot of network activity, I might need to make sure I've got high throughput instance type. And you can check our documentation in the EC2 documentation to work out the best instance type for your particular workload. So in this case, I'm just going to use an M4 large with 8 gig of RAM and 2 virtual CPUs. In the next section here, I get to choose how I want to manage the life cycle of my machine. So by default, it will AWS Cloud9 will shut down the underlying EC2 instance after 30 minutes of inactivity. Now that's great because it means if I go home at 5 o'clock and leave the instance run, I'd be paying for it all night when, even though I'm not using it. With this option set to 30 minutes after the IDE stops being used, the instance will be automatically shut down. You can always connect in again later and it will automatically start back up, but this will help you to reduce and control costs. If you're running an overnight test, for example, you could set it up to never shut down and then the EC2 instance will keep running. The last section we need to look at down here is the network settings. I'm going to my VPC because that has internet access, but you may want to create a new VPC, depending on your configuration. You may want to actually launch your EC2 instance inside a VPC that has access to, say, an Amazon RDS instance if you need to do any database work. And maybe that that RDS instance has been deployed in a private subnet. So you're going to need to do some network configuration there, but you've got the options to completely control where that instance gets created. Okay, so I'm just going to leave those defaults and press next. I get to review the settings, and just before I press create environment, a couple of things we need to point out. Firstly, the environment will not be backed up on your behalf. So when you're writing your source code, you need to use a source control manager. So either AWS Code Commit or GitHub or your choice. AWS Cloud9 will not perform backups for your source code. That's up to you to do. And also, because similar to the way that the EC2 instances are managed, you need to also be responsible for patching and backing up the underlying instance. So if you install any additional software on that instance, you need to make sure that you're maintaining the latest versions of any patches that come out. The AWS Cloud9 environment won't do that for you. We also recommend that you turn on AWS CloudTrail on your account so that you can keep track of any resource creation or deletion, given the fact that you may be sharing your environment out to other individuals. So this is just a way of following best practice and having some governance and auditing in place. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's just click Create Environment. So after making a couple of choices there, all I've had to do is click Create Environment, and the AWS Cloud9 system will actually spin up that IDE for me ready to go. I just want to show you what's actually going on under the covers. It's actually using CloudFormation to do the work. So if I just open up my CloudFormation panel here and just do a quick refresh, you can see I've got this CloudFormation stack, which is in creating progress. And what is actually going on here is that AWS Cloud9 is using CloudFormation to create a security group to control access to an underlying instance, and that instance is being spun up automatically for me. And that'll only take a second or so to do, and then I'll be able to access my my IDE. Okay, so we won't wait there for that. Oh, there we go, it's all done, right? If I click on that link, you can see, just want to quickly show you that it is just a standard EC2 instance, but the difference here is that it's using a developer-specific AMI that's designed for the AWS Cloud9 environment, which you can see down here. And if we just have a quick look at the EC2 security groups, you can see that it's got access to anywhere in the port. If you wanted to make a change to that, you could easily make a change to that security group that's been created for you. Okay, so let's go back over to our IDE. Our IDE has now been spun up. We've only been waiting for about 45 seconds, and we are now ready to start coding. Just before I go through the look and feel of the IDE and some of the features, I just want to mention that I just went through a manual process to stand up the IDE ready to go. And that is a standalone IDE. There's no source control set up for me. I'll have to set everything up manually if I want to do any CI/CD. That's obviously something I would need to set up. But in order for you to get a full CI/CD pipeline, which is generally what we want to do, we need a shortcut way of setting everything up, and that's where AWS CodeStar comes in. AWS CodeStar is a cloud-based service for creating, managing and working with software development projects on AWS. You can really quickly develop, build and deploy applications on AWS with an AWS CodeStar project, including a full CI/CD pipeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Start Project. I'm going to, just as a test, I'm going to create a web service that is using Node.js and is deploying to AWS Lambda. I'm going to give it a name, webinar. I'll just call it webinar 100. Oops, code 100. I get to choose my source control repository. So in this case, I could choose GitHub or I could choose code commit. So I'm going to use code commit. Click next. And then I'm ready to review my details here and create the project. So I'm just going to go ahead and click create project. That's it. That's all I've had to do. And the full CI/CD pipeline is now being created for me by CodeStar. I now get to decide how I want to edit my code. Now I could use Eclipse or I could use Visual Studio or I could use the command line to edit my code, but with the integration with AWS Cloud9, I can simply choose AWS Cloud9 and click next. And now I get the same ability to choose the EC2 environment, the network settings, and cost saving settings that I did that I showed you just before in Cloud9 directly. I'm just going to leave everything as default here and click next. And that's all I've had to do. The CI/CD pipeline is being set up with code build, code pipeline, CloudFormation, code deploy, and also the IDE is being spun up for me. Now that's going to take a couple of minutes to set up, but I don't have to do anything else. There's no more level of effort required for me to get that up and running. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit later in the session. Let's go back to the IDE. So as a developer, the first thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to change the way my IDE looks. So I can choose different themes here. So if I like more of an Eclipse look, I can easily change that. Very configurable. I can go directly into the CSS settings and configure the look and feel of every component here in the IDE. I also want to set some preferences. So if I go to the preferences menu up here, the most important thing that I want to set before I get started is whether or not I want to use tabs or spaces. That's going to get into a religious argument, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to leave the default as using soft tabs. But you can see there are many options in here that I can configure for the look and feel and the behavior of how I like my IDE to run. Many other settings, but I just want to point out a couple of important ones. Under the AWS settings, even though I'm running my IDE in the US East 1 region, I can target any region for creating any assets. So for example, when I create a Lambda function a little bit later, the IDE will automatically target Sydney, no problem, even though the IDE is running in US East. Just going to leave that as a default at the moment. And also the AWS managed credentials. This is important. Like I mentioned earlier, you want to get up and running quickly and you want to get up and running securely. By using the AWS Managed Temporary Credentials, AWS Cloud9 will automatically rotate the credentials every 15 minutes using temporary session-based credentials, which is going to strengthen your security profile. So I'm going to leave that set to automatically manage. But if I wanted to use my own credentials for some particular reason, I can easily edit the AWS credentials file, or I could even turn this off and use an EC2 instance profile if I choose to manage the environment that way. I'm just going to follow best practice and use the AWS temporary managed credentials. for the moment. There's a lot of other settings in here. Probably the next most important one are the key bindings. So it is a fully featured IDE, and you can use shortcuts to do many familiar things. And you can see the list here is extensive. That list is also available as a shortcut list down here on the left-hand side. Any of these key bindings can be adjusted. So for example, if I want to use a different key sequence for save, instead of using Command S, I can just click on it and say I wanted to use Command Shift S. And you can see the Command Shift S, and that's now going to, if I save that, that's actually going to change how Command S works. Oh, sorry, how the shortcut key for save. Let me just fix that. Now I've broken it. Okay. Okay. So while I can go through and I can edit all this manually using the IDE, what I might want to do is actually export these settings out and use them on a different environment. The good thing is that down here in the AWS Cloud9 menu, I can choose my user settings, and you can see that that data is actually stored as a JSON payload. So I could actually go in here and edit any of these directly rather than using the IDE visual interface. But I could also highlight the entire section, drop it into source control, share it with other developers, so I don't have to go through and set that up every time I want to use a different environment. Okay, so you can probably see by now that the IDE is a tab and panel-based IDE, and it's also has a menuing system as well. So we've got these panels on the side that slide out depending on which panel you're referring to will have different information in, and also the menus have various options in them. All of these can be bound to keystrokes, as I mentioned before. I can also create new files, and you can see that file will, if I make a change to this, can be saved on the local file system that's running in the cloud. Now I can also drag and drop my panels around, so I can move them as you'd expect in any modern IDE, the ability to lay out the IDE the way that you like, including even splitting panels like so. So what I'm going to do is just have a quick look at the bottom down here is where the terminal window is. Now I mentioned in the overview that the terminal, the AWS Cloud9 environment gives you direct access to the terminal running on the underlying Linux instance in the cloud. So if I just wanted to say ping the world, you can see there I'm getting around about 1 millisecond round trip time from the instance running in US East out into the world. Now that is not from my local desktop here. That's actually, this is just a view on that remote session. So that's the speed that we're getting, the AWS network speed out into the world. And also because I'm using AWS managed credentials and the configuration of the instance already has the AWS CLI and SDKs installed, I can actually interact with my AWS environment directly from here. Say, for example, if I wanted to do an S3 list to show all the buckets in my account, there are all the buckets all running in my account running in US East. That list is also, I can also list my Lambda functions. So if I say AWS Lambda list functions, oops, and now I get a list of all of my AWS Lambda functions. I can use any of the AWS CLI tools that I need to get my job done. That list of Lambda functions is also reflected over here in the AWS resources. So if I open this panel, you can see all of the Lambda functions that I have running in my account. So let's do a quick test. What I want to do is I want to upload some files. I'm going to get rid of this one. Get that out of the way. I want to upload some files. So I can actually drag drop off my local file system. I have a folder here containing files. I can drag that into the tree, and that's now going to automatically upload the files onto the instance and make them available in the tree here. Now that's going to preserve the folder structure that was in that folder that I uploaded as well. So a couple of things we can do. I can even have a look at JPEGs in the IDE. I can edit. I can do some rotations. I can also do some cropping, etc. So some pretty neat tools there just to get some work done in the IDE with having to leave the IDE to do it. What I can also do is do some debugging of a local file that's just a standalone Node.js file, for example. So if I open up this test.js file, this is a very simple example of a Node.js program that's just going to print out to the console. So what I'll do is I'll just clear the output down here. So what I want to do is I want to set a breakpoint and step through. So I want to debug this code. So what I can do is I can just click on the gutter here and set a breakpoint. IDE knows that this is a debugger. This is, again, all running on the remote instance that's happening in the cloud. It's going to then hit that breakpoint, and I can now start interactively debugging this, this code. So my breakpoint is here on this show message function. And if I step in, I now jump into the show message function, and it's been passed in a parameter, which you can see there. If I mouse over that parameter, I get to see the actual current value of that parameter. I also have the ability to step over and step in, and I can even make changes to those variables on the fly. So if I just grab that sum message variable, drop it into the expression manager over here, and make a change, just change that to AWS Cloud9 hello world. And then when I mouse over it now, you can see it's changed, and I can then run to completion. So what I've just then done is I've set a breakpoint, and I've stepped through my code. I've inspected the values of the variables that are currently in the context of the running function, and I've been able to make changes to that code, just like you would expect in a fully fledged IDE. So it's very, very powerful. Okay, so let's take it a little further. What if we wanted to do some work on a Lambda function? So what I have here is if I just open up my AWS resources, I have my list of Lambda functions, and I've got a pre-canned hello world Lambda function that I want to do some work on. Now that Lambda function actually is living here in my Lambda console, so I'm just going to quickly open that so you can see it. It's just a stock standard Lambda function that I've previously created, and the source code is down here, very, very simple as it's loading up. Also, I noticed that the IDE, or a subset of the IDE, is now available in the Lambda console. So you get that same tree view and the same look and feel, code completion, code hinting, etc., directly in the Lambda console. I'm not sure why that's not loading. Let's not wait for it. Let's go over here and import the file. So let's just assume that what I want to do is I want to do some debugging and editing of that code. So what I can do is I can right-click on the file or on the Lambda function and say import, and then agree to import Lambda function into my environment. Let me just close that down. So what we're going to see now is we have one local function. So it isn't changing that remote function. That remote function is still out there, but it's actually brought it into my IDE. So if I just close down a couple of these windows here, and you can see now there's a folder called webinar hello world, and it's brought in everything that I need. It's brought in the index file, which is actually the code that should be shown there. We're just going to refresh that. It's actually the implementation of the code. It's brought in the SAM template. That's the template.yaml there. That's the serverless application model template, which defines how that function is deployed. And what I also want to point out importantly is this .application.json file. This is a Cloud9 construct, and this tells AWS Cloud9 how to deploy that Lambda function. You can see here the deployment method is set to Lambda. We're going to see in a second when I modify this file or modify this Lambda function that it's going to change its deployment method. Also notice here the physical ID has a region and a name, and that's how AWS Cloud9 knows what it's targeting when it does its deploys. Okay, so let's say I want to run a debug session on this code. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint here in the first console, and now I'm going to click on run. Now this time AWS Cloud9 knows that this is a Lambda function that's in my local functions list. So rather than executing it down here in a terminal window, it's actually opened up this Lambda setup. So what I can do is I can either debug or run the Lambda function locally, or I can run the Lambda function remotely. If I click on the remote version, it's going to run the Lambda function as if I ran it from the Lambda management console. So if I click on local, what I can do is I can run a test here locally. Now what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to grab the test event. This is the test event I've been using, and I'm just going to paste that in there. So what this is going to do is it's going to pass in an object containing key 1, key 2, key 3 with 3 values, and then that's going to be passed in as the event, and then I'm going to just log those out, and then I'm going to return a successful result with just the string welcome to AWS Cloud9. So that's what that code does. So let's first of all just run that. This is where the AWS Cloud9 environment automatically stands up the SAM local editor to run that Lambda function locally on the EC instance. So that allows me to just do a quick pass through and run the function without making any changes. And I could have done that SAM local invocation myself, but the great thing is that the AWS Cloud9 integration with SAM local makes it really easy, as you just saw. Now what I want to do is, it didn't hit that breakpoint because I didn't debug, I just ran the file. So if I click on the debug icon, next time I run the Lambda function, and again, this is running locally on the on SAM local, you can see how it hits the breakpoint. And again, I can step through the code. I can make changes to the various parameters. I can even inspect what the event looks like. I can have a look at what the context of the Lambda function looks like, which is always very interesting as well. So very easy for me to edit and debug, step through and make changes to that code. So let's make a change. Say, for example, I want to add a GUID generator into my Lambda function. So I've got some pre-canned code here, which I'm going to just cut and paste so you don't have to watch me type. I'm going to go back over to my index file and I'm going to paste that in. So what this is going to do is, if I fix my typo, this is going to use an external dependency, a node dependency called time UID. It's going to generate an ID, print it out, and then it's going to return that to from the Lambda function result. So I'm going to add in here your is and add that in. New ID. See how I've got auto completion? The environment knows that the new ID is in scope and it's able to do auto completion. And I can also do things like if I type in console, which is a keyword, and hit dot, it's going to give me a list of all the supported properties and functions of that object as well. So it's a really nice way of working. And also notice here, I didn't put a semicolon at the end of this line, and I've got some code hinting here telling me that there is a missing semicolon. So that's just some linting and hinting niceness that just helped me along the way as I develop my code. So now I've made that change, I'm actually just going to rerun the code. I won't debug it this time, I'm going to rerun it. And I know this is going to fail because I've actually referred to a dependency. Well, that's interesting. I have referred to a dependency I haven't brought in yet. So I think I might have reused a previous environment. I have, there we go, look, that node modules there is already. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clean this up so I can rerun that process. You notice down here in the terminal, if I do an LL, you can see that this is the file system structure that I'm looking at up here. So I can just cd into the hello world folder, and I'm going to remove the node modules. I'm just going to completely remove those. Notice how the node modules disappeared. So this IDE tree view here is showing in real time and in sync with what's on the file system. Now when I run that one more time, the dependency is missing. Node won't be able to find that dependency. So in order for me to bring that dependency in, I need to do some dependency management. Now in the case of Node, that's using NPM. So just like I would do in any other environment, I just use my Node skills to bring the dependencies in. So I'll just come in here and I'd say NPM install -save. Time UID, and then on the EC2 instance running in the cloud, that's pulling in the dependencies, updating the node modules folder, and installing everything that I need to get up and running. And now when I press run, it will run to completion. So at this point, if I click on Lambda remote and run, this is actually executing the Lambda function in the context of AWS. Notice how I'm getting the old results, and the reason for that is because I've made a change to my local Lambda function, but I haven't deployed it. So in order to do my deploying, it's a very simple process. I just find the Lambda function, right click and say deploy. That is now going to automatically update the Lambda function. You saw how quickly that was updated. And now when I run the Lambda remote again and press run, this time I'll have my new output. So you can see how easy and quick it is for me to make changes there and deploy them out. The next thing I might want to do is to change this Lambda function from a standalone Lambda function to a serverless application model Lambda function. So what I can do is I can right click and say convert to SAM. What that's going to do, actually before I do that, I want to open up the application JSON file. Remember I mentioned before the deployment method is Lambda. When I change it to deployment method SAM, to convert it to a SAM template, the deployment method will now change to CloudFormation. And so at this point, when I do a deploy of the function, this is going to cause AWS Cloud9 to ask CloudFormation to deploy that function out into my AWS environment. It is going to orphan at this point the original Lambda function. So this is going to create a brand new Lambda function. And that Lambda function is going to have its name decorated the way that CloudFormation normally decorates Lambda functions with a unique ID. So you can see there now that that deployment has happened, that the physical ID has been updated to match what CloudFormation called that Lambda function when it deployed it. So if I go over to my CloudFormation manager and press refresh, you'll see there that I've got a new template, a new stack, and that has been deployed the Lambda function with this name. So that's all being done automatically for me. I'm only showing you what's going on with CloudFormation so you can put the pieces together. But as a typical developer, you don't need to worry about any of that. You can just use the IDE to do the deployments. So that's how you can convert a standalone Lambda function into a SAM Lambda function. What if we wanted to start off and actually create a brand new SAM application? So what I can do is I can click on the Lambda icon up here, and I can create a brand new application. So I'm going to call this web application, and I'm going to call this web app function. So what I'm doing is I'm creating an application called web application. I'm creating a function inside that application called web function. Click on next. Now I get to choose a blueprint if I want to use a blueprint at all. So I'm just going to use an empty hello world. I can define a trigger. I'm going to come to that in just a second, so I'll just leave that for the moment. I can define how much RAM I want to assign to that Lambda function, and also which IAM role I want to use. I'm just going to leave everything as default for the moment. Review my settings, and then click Finish. What AWS Cloud9 will now do is it's going to create a brand new SAM application, and inside that, it's going to have my web function, which it's going to write for me using that blueprint that I chose. So I'm just going to close these down. This is what we're operating on now over here in this web function. So right now, that is being deployed automatically using CloudFormation. So if I just refresh over here, that will be updated in just a moment. Now, this is just again, just a standard Lambda function. So I can set a breakpoint, and I can click Run, and I can debug that Lambda function directly in the IDE, just as I did before. Now this, of course, doesn't actually do much at the moment. It just calls the callback, but I can obviously write some code and extend that to do additional work. So that just gives you an idea how I can start a brand new Lambda or a serverless application and have that managed through the IDE. If I just go back though, that's only one function inside that application, and generally applications are going to have many more functions that you're using to build your application. So what I can do is I can add a new function in here by using the create here feature. When I say create here, notice that the application name is set to the same. So I don't actually get to change that, but I can call this web function 2, oops, and click next. Now this time what I want to do is I want to create a Lambda function which is exposed via an API hosted by Amazon API Gateway. So what I can do is I can scroll down here and just find the API Gateway Hello World, just to save me a bit of typing. So that I'll choose that blueprint. This time I'm going to choose a function trigger, and I'm going to specify that I want to use API Gateway to do that. I can now select a resource path. So I'm just going to call this my API. So this means that this is the resource path that will be accessible from the endpoint that gets deployed into Amazon API Gateway. I get to choose my security model. Just for the moment, I'm going to choose none, but of course, when I'm moving into production, I'd probably want to use Amazon Cognito to get some best practice security integration into my API. Click next. Again, I can choose the memory size and choose an IAM role or have one automatically generated for me. Let's just leave those as defaults for the moment. Review my settings again and click Finish. So now the second function is going to be created inside that application. And you can see down here, we've now got inside that web application, I've got two folders, so under the web application, web function 1 and web function 2. What's important to point out here though is that the YAML file, I'm just going to close this down so we can see it better. The YAML file, which describes my entire serverless application, now contains both web functions, and it also contains the relevant permissions in order for me to have that Lambda function invoked by API Gateway. I didn't have to write any of this. It's been written for me as a starting point, as boilerplate for me to then make changes to. So in this particular case, I'm exposing the path my API to any method. So I can obviously go in here and make changes to the way that I want to expose my various Lambda functions and verbs, etc., by editing this serverless application model template directly. Now let's say I want to debug this application of this web function. So what I can do is I can put a breakpoint in again just by clicking in the gutter, click Run again. This time the IDE knows that this is an API Gateway capable function, so it is actually reading the template to determine the endpoints that are available, and so it's pre-populated with my API. So I'm just going to do a get on that, but I could of course do a post or a put. So for example, if I did a post or a put, I'd have to implement the relevant handlers inside my Lambda function, but we'll just put that aside for the moment. I can just call the get method. I'm going to set the breakpoint, the debugger on, and click run. And that will again instantiate SAM local and allow me to hit a breakpoint. So again, I can open up the context. I can have a look at the data that's coming in. I can have a look at the event that's coming, which of course was nothing because it was a get, and I can step through my code. Just as I would do in any IDE, make changes to any of the expressions or any of the arguments that are currently in scope, etc., and run to completion. So that's a pretty powerful set of features. At this point, if I wanted to make changes to my code, let's say, for example, I came in here and said I want to do a console log of hello world. Again, you can see how I've got the auto completion. For me to actually debug that locally, that's easy. I just press run and debug. But if I want to now deploy that change out into the real AWS environment, I just need to right click on the application itself and say deploy. Now what that's going to do is it's going to redeploy the entire application again. But because we're using CloudFormation change sets, what will happen is the IDE will construct a change set with AWS CloudFormation, and it's actually going to then only change the various parameters that have been changed in that application itself, not the entire, not every resource. So while that's been happening, the deployment is probably already finished. It's still in progress. If we have a look at the events, yes, okay, it's too quick for me. Too quick for me to actually see this in action. And again, you don't need to touch any of this CloudFormation control panel at all. You can just stay here in the IDE and use all the tooling that we have available here and let that be managed for you. Okay, so that gives you a really good idea on the tools that are available in the IDE and how you can manually deploy, create a serverless application and do some manual deployments. But what if we wanted to go back to our CodeStar environment and use our IDE integrated with our CI/CD pipeline? So if I go back over to AWS CodeStar, we can now see that our project and IDE are set up and ready to go. And what CodeStar has done is it's set up our source with code commit, it's set up our build with code build, and it's set up our deployment pipeline using CloudFormation. So what I want to do is I actually want to edit the code in this particular environment. Now note that this is a completely separate environment from the one I just showed you. So if I click on the IDE here, I've now got this environment called Webinar Code 100, and I can click on Open IDE, which is going to go through the same process that we saw earlier when we manually spun up the IDE and then connected to it. That is now done for me. I'm now ready to start coding. But what I want to point out is that because Cloud9 and CodeStar are integrated, as soon as I log onto that instance for the first time, what the environment is doing is it's pulling in the latest version of the code in the AWS code commit repo. So without me having to do anything, it's actually done a pull, a git pull from AWS code commit, and it's pulled in the latest version of code. So I'm now in the position to actually go into my index file. Let's do a quick change here. This is actually just a very quick Bootstrap template example. It's actually using the AWS Serverless Express framework so that I can expose various methods through an API. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my app folder here, and I'm just going to put a console login because that's a really good way to get started. So you called get. Okay, save that. And again, as you saw before, I can click on the gutter, I can press run. Oops, I'm in the wrong place. Let me just go over here and sync. And let's try that one more time. It's still deploying, it's not yet ready to go. So anyway, what I can do is I could set a breakpoint and actually start developing. And I think it's because I need to do that. Yes, I was in the wrong place. So I can choose my API gateway local. I can do my get and click the debug icon and press run. And what I will do is I'll get a breakpoint here and I'll let that run, and then I should see my hello world code. Let that breakpoint go, press run. And I have a bug, so let's not worry about that. But you get the idea, hopefully. So let's say I've made that change, and at this point it is still only local to the EC2 instance that I'm running the IDE on. It hasn't made a change in the AWS environment. So what I want to do is I want to actually check my code in and have it automatically deployed through the CI/CD pipeline. So again, if I come down here into my terminal and I cd into my webinar folder and I do a git status, because everything's already set up for me, you can see down here that it's recognized that the app.js file has changed, which of course it has. So I can just do a git add, a git commit, fixed a bug, and then a git push. Just as I would normally do when I'm developing. I can do merging, pushing, etc. Of course, I would have done a branch. If this was a real development example, I would have done a branch and then done a merge. But let's put that aside for the moment. At this point, the code has been checked into AWS code commit. And if I go back over to AWS CodeStar and go back to my dashboard, we can now see that that check-in has gone ahead. So you can see the fixed debug. And just within a couple of seconds, the CI/CD pipeline has already kicked off, and the code is being pulled out of by code pipeline being pulled out of code commit. It will be then passed on to code build for building, and then deployment out into my AWS Lambda function. So that's how easy it is for me to get up and running really quickly with a full CI/CD pipeline and get some deployments into my production environment or my staging or QA environment very, very quickly. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is the collaboration. As I mentioned before, it's very important to be able to collaborate with your team members when you're running on a team for pair programming or just asking for assistance. Now, what I've got here is I've got another IDE. I'm just going to put this aside for a second. So this is a split screen, what you're looking at now. This is the original IDE that I was playing with at the start of the session. Let's close some of these windows down. And we'll open up Web Function 2. So we're looking at Web Function 2 here in the left-hand side, logged on as one user. And on the right-hand side, I've logged on as a different user called John Smith. Just assume John Smith is my colleague. Now, in John Smith's view, if he has a look at his environments, he doesn't have any environments. If he has a look at shared environments, he doesn't have any shared environments either. So John Smith basically has no access to any Cloud9 instances. But what I can do to get John's assistance from over here is I can click on the collaborate icon, and I can click on the share button. So down here, it's telling me that nobody apart from myself has access to this IDE, but I can invite John, who's a member, an IAM user in my account. I can invite John by typing in his IAM username and click invite, and then agree that I want to allow John to have access, and that's it. So John is now able to have access to my environment. He's showing as offline, which makes sense because he hasn't done anything yet. So I'm just going to move that split screen over here, go back to this hamburger menu, and if I now click on shared with you, what we should see is, there it is the environment over here is now shared with John, and he can now open the IDE. So just a reminder, this is a completely different browser, could be anywhere in the world on any different laptop, and you can see the theme on this particular browser hasn't even been set up, so it's even a different look and feel. So every individual developer can have their individual look and feel. So I'm just going to close that collaborate window down, and over here on the left-hand side, if I highlight some code, you can see on the right-hand side how it's automatically updating in real time as the developer on the left-hand side does any work. You can actually see on the right-hand side that the other developer can follow along. So I can even make some changes here to the code, console log, hello, and you can see that updating in real time on the right-hand side. And of course, John can also make changes. And you can see how easy that will be for you to do pair programming or do a code review or get some assistance from another team member. You can also use the chat feature to send chat messages to each other and really work together more of a team, no matter where you are in the world, using the same IDE. Okay, so we've seen a lot of things today. We're almost out of time. I've shown you how we can import an existing Lambda function into the AWS Cloud9 IDE to allow you to edit and debug and update and deploy changes to that Lambda function. I've shown you how we can convert a standalone Lambda function to an AWS serverless application and start making serverless applications in that way. I've shown you how we can create a brand new serverless application in AWS Cloud9 and add multiple Lambda functions to it, including functions that are exposed via Amazon API Gateway, and how we can debug those functions. I've also shown you how we can collaborate across the room or across the world with other developers in the same IDE, and also, really importantly, how we can use AWS CodeStar to set up not only our AWS Cloud9 IDE for our own use, but also how we can put together an entire CI/CD pipeline in a couple of clicks, stood up in a couple of minutes, allowing us to get up and running really quickly, starting to write code with the full support of a full cloud-native build and deploy pipeline, all in a couple of clicks. AWS Cloud9 is available for you to use today, and you'll find it in your AWS console. It's available in a couple of regions in the US, in US East 1, which is what I was using today, and US East 2, as well as in US West 2. It's also available in Ireland, in EU West 1, and in Asia Pacific in our AP Southeast 1 Singapore region. Now, there's no charge for using AWS Cloud9. You only pay for the resources that you use. So if you choose to use your own Linux server and use SSH access, as I mentioned early on in the session, then there's no additional charges for you to use AWS Cloud9 at all. If you want to use the managed option, the managed EC2 option, then again, there is no charge for the IDE, and you just pay the standard compute and storage charges to run your code on that Linux instance. So thanks very much for joining me for this overview and this very quick demo of the AWS Cloud9 features. I hope you found it useful. As I mentioned earlier, the recorded presentation and slides from this session will be made available in the next week or so. So if you want to share the presentation with colleagues or revisit the content, you can go ahead and do so. Now, what we're going to do now is just take a quick break and run a very quick poll with some questions that we'd really like your help to answer. Generally take a minute or so to complete. I'm just going to pause for 1 minute while our moderator does that for us. Your feedback is really helpful, very helpful for us to continually improve our processes and to create even bigger and better content for future webinars. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to let you know about some upcoming developer-specific sessions, in particular Dev Lounge. So we're starting our Dev Lounge series for 2018 in March, and our first session is going to be about reimagining your user experience with Amazon Lex, Amazon Polly, and also Amazon Alexa skills. Now that the Amazon Alexa is available in Australia and New Zealand, it's a very important question that we're being asked by a lot of developers about where Amazon Lexa, Amazon Polly, and Amazon Alexa skills fit in. So we're going to cover that in that session. We're going to be doing that in mid-March. The dates will be published soon, so look out for an invitation to the event in the next couple of weeks to be sure that you reserve your spot. Spots do fill up very quickly, so do register as soon as you get the invitation. We're going to be running that session in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth, Auckland, and Wellington, and we're really looking forward to it. So thank you so much for joining me for this webinar today. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you've found it enlightening. I really do encourage you to log on to the AWS console, spin up an AWS Cloud9 IDE, get a feel for it. You can get an AWS Lambda function up and running or serverless application up and running very quickly, and also play with the AWS CodeStar service, which is going to set up that full CI/CD pipeline for you in just a couple of clicks and get you up and running and starting to write some really cool code very, very quickly. Now, our moderator tells us we don't have any outstanding questions that we need to address. So what I'll do at this point is, again, thank you for joining and look forward to you joining us next time.